Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the topic of this special order.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, I rise this evening with my colleagues from upstate New York to discuss a matter that's extraordinarily important to all the people throughout New York State, but particularly those who reside in New York State outside of New York City. New York State is one of the few states in America that requires a portion of its share of Medicaid costs, which is health care for the poor and the elderly, its share of Medicaid costs to be paid by local property taxpayers. It has now been 51 years that New York State, since the days of Governor Nelson Rockefeller, that New York imposed this incredibly onerous burden on the local property taxpayers in our state. In fact, in the entire United States of America, there's approximately $9.5 billion being spent by local governments on Medicaid costs, which in virtually every other state are paid for by the state government. $9.5 billion. But in New York State, our taxpayers pay $7.2 billion of that $9.5 billion in Medicaid costs mandated by New York State, mandated by Albany. And this is an outrageous burden. The county property taxpayers, those are homeowners and commercial property taxpayers in our state, pay over $2.2 billion each year in property taxes in mandated costs over which the county governments have no control whatsoever. So tonight, Mr. Speaker, and my colleagues, I rise and I'm pleased to have organized this special order with my colleagues from New York State to discuss this dire situation that our taxpayers endure and what our recommended solution is. Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, we were successful in including in the American Health Care Act a provision which would, as of 2020, eliminate the ability of Albany to impose this burden on local homeowners and commercial property taxpayers. It would improve the real estate values in our state. It would be one more reason for people to stay in New York rather than to flee New York. The thing that I hear from people over and over again in my district, in the 19th District, in the Catskills, and the Hudson Valley of New York, is their kids and grandchildren are being driven out of state because there are no jobs, and they are being driven out of state by high property taxes. One of the reasons for those high property taxes is the New York State Medicaid mandate. So with Mr. Collins, Mr. Reed, Ms. Tenney, Mr. Zeldin, we were successful in including in the American Health Care Act a provision which would, as of 2020, eliminate this burden on local homeowners and require Albany to do what other states, the 49 other states, do, which is to take control of its own Medicaid system and not impose these burdens on the counties. And just here next to me, Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, you can see in the 11 counties that I represent, in the Mid-Hudson and in the Catskills of New York State, over $224 million a year is coming out of homeowners' pockets, coming out of commercial real estate owner pockets, and going to pay for Albany's costs. We are ending that as of 2020 under the provision and the legislation that I've authored with Mr. Collins and Ms. Tenney and Mr. Reed and Mr. Zeldin and Ms. Stefanik, because we know that this burden is unjust and it's uncalled for. So, Mr. Speaker and my colleagues, I'm delighted at this time to yield such time as he may consume to my colleague from Western New York, from the Southern Tier, Mr. Reed.